everybody, and welcome back to the Talk Busy with Lizzy podcast. I'm your host, Lizzy, and we are back again with a very special guest. Her name is Julia, and I am so excited to have her on to share her story from substance abuse and addiction, the recovery, and now being 7 years sober, how that's going, where she's at now. She goes into so much about her story, so I think that her story can not only help people who they themselves are going through something like this, but I think it can also bring so much compassion into this world of just understanding what people who are going through addiction, what they're going through. Because unless you yourself have experienced it, you don't know. And even getting closer of just having a family member or a friend who goes through it, you might know better, but you still don't fully know. And so I just think that her story can do a lot of really good. And so I'm so excited to be sharing it today. So without further ado, let's hear from Julia.
What is your story? And you can go at that from any angle you'd
like. My story, I'm 32 years old. I'll have 7 years sober in August. So I'm, excuse me, in like stable recovery. I grew up in Washington State. I struggled with school quite a bit, got heavily involved with the party scene and drugs really young in my adolescence, and ended up trying to go to SAS, an alternative school. Wasn't really able to, finish schooling of any sort. And I grew up in the church, so it was kind of like a dichotomy. My childhood had a lot of trauma. Parents weren't very emotionally stable. Dad was like really alcoholic, domineering, narcissistic traits, kind of just no emotions, lots of yelling. Mm-hmm. And I'm born like a Cancer, like a double Cancer. I'm super sensitive and had a lot of quirks and tics and just, needed, now we know like my brain's a little different. I'm neurodivergent, sensory stuff, all stuff that I'm now seeing in my own child that I can identify. But, 25 years ago, it wasn't as, Mm-hmm. So I kind of came out of the womb struggling. Like I struggled in preschool and kindergarten and always been really bright, really creative, artsy, but just, I think there's a percentage of us in the world that just struggle to adapt to like the main rules of life. Mm-hmm. Like getting up in the morning and going to school. Like that was hard. I didn't want to do it, Mm-hmm. And I think probably, 1,000 years ago, that could have served me somehow in like the hunter-gatherer world or whatever, I can't do math, however long ago that was, caveman days. But, in this culture, it's not like that. So I grew up always feeling not good enough, really, really, really trying to appease my never going to be good enough for my dad. We fought so much. He was really angry, and I learned how to mask really well. So I was like trying so hard to be an overachiever, trying to be whatever. And at the same time, like I was always failing and falling Mm-hmm. short. So substances were like really a saving grace for me, a way to, the first time I used them, I was like an immediate tool, and it makes sense. Like if we're looking at the whole picture, like substances really came in and gave me what I was lacking and I didn't know how to get from life. I just didn't have the coping skills. And so like getting drunk, getting high was the solution, and it was a great solution until it caused a bunch of problems and wreaked a bunch of havoc. So, right. So yeah, that's kind of my story. I always had a strong faith because I was able to light that spark as a child. For somehow, some way, I was like really close to God when I was a kid. That was like a coping skill. I think we're all, especially like us sensitive people, we're like attuned to that stuff, Yeah. So that was interesting too. Another dichotomy, like I'm starting to get into the bad crowds and do really bad things and go against my morals. But like deep down, I have this like true knowing of like, this isn't really you. So that's something else I carried into my addiction. And yeah, my story just unfolded in that way until I went to rehab a bunch of times and finally was able to get sober. So that's like the condensed version. now life is totally different, homeowner, business owner, taking care of my partner's elderly grandma. We have a daughter. Life's hard. It's just in a different way.
Yeah.
And my whole life is like just giving back to other women in recovery and that are struggling. And but just balancing all of the fullness and the chaos and the stuff, trying to stay in balance with mental health, physical health, emotional health, family,
Yeah.
yeah, doing all the things.
Yeah.
So that's the condensed version.
Yeah. Well, what are some of your like biggest tips or things that you do to keep yourself balanced in that way?
Oh boy. Well, my friend sponsor always says like balance is not a real thing. Like it's just like an unattainable goal. And
Mhm.
I think that it kind of takes the pressure off a little bit, because what I found is, especially having ADHD, I will, when I'm focused on one area of my life, like that's what I'm focused on. So like the
Mhm.
last few months, it's really been about my daughter, and she's, as a family, we're going through some hard stuff. And then as a result, we're growing closer and we're seeking resources and we're learning and we're growing. And so now that I'm doing that, like maybe my sponsees are taking a back seat, not as much. And then maybe I have like, um, recovery one week where it's like I'm speaking on a panel, I'm meeting with a sponsee, I'm doing this. So then like my focus is like really I'm thinking a lot about like my recovery and the big book and my story, or like doing this podcast. And then if that makes sense. And so
Yeah.
everything just kind of like flows, and I don't do it perfectly, but yeah, ever evolving, ever changing. My biggest, yeah, I don't know, I guess it would depend on what the person is struggling with balance wise. I think to have such a full life that you have to incorporate balance is a blessing.
Mhm.
And I will just continue, God will continue to tune me and refine me where I can show up for all the things. My thing is I get a little bit resentful when I'm too full, and I have to like step back and be like, actually this is so great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I love that. Like, I've been seeing a lot of trends lately on TikTok where it's like, um, having too many options is a blessing, having so many things to balance is a blessing, and all these things. I think that's so true and something we don't tend to think about. So I think that's really awesome.
Yeah. No, I had to check myself today about that too. I was like, and once I can like get that switch to like gratitude, it's like, oh, okay, for sure. And
Yeah.
really, how much time a day do I waste scrolling TikTok where I could be putting an hour towards like the administrative work I need to be doing or whatever I've put off? You know what I mean? So like
Yeah.
it comes down to me and my time management. So
Yeah. Absolutely. I feel that one. So,
yeah.
um, what were some of the biggest ways that your addiction affected you?
Wow. Well, for me personally, and like whatever it is, like my physiology, biochemistry, the first time I experienced substances of any kind, like it lit up my brain in a way that doesn't light up like maybe my little sisters.
Mhm.
So I fell in love in a way that I can't really explain unless you know that kind of, like it was like a ferocious hunger, a need, like that was how I was going to exist and cope. And
Mhm.
so that shifted everything for me, because at the end of the day, nothing was as important as that. Nothing was going to be as fun as getting loaded.
Mhm.
And it changed everything, like normal people can find satisfaction in like, I'm just thinking of like high school, like just going to a football game with friends. And I really missed out on those opportunities because to me, that was never enough. There had to be hard alcohol involved,
Mhm.
drinking, partying of some degree. So, yeah, it shifted me that way. I was very emotionally stunted. I never learned a lot of coping skills or just really how to grow up. I kind of felt like I
Mhm.
was just always pretending. And that changed me. So I've done a lot of catch up in the last 7 years. And really, I've been trying to get stable for about a decade. I got sober the first time when I was 19, and then this last time I was 26. So it took me a while. And I feel like I lived a lifetime in those years of trying to get sober. So that changed me. But and then just the ripple effect it had on everyone around me. But also, like, I know that it was probably all a divine plan, and I've really shaken things up in like my family tree, and my mom and my sister were all like pretty emotionally involved at this point because we've had to be. I think when
Mhm.
addiction comes into someone's life, the
Yeah.
whole it really shakes things up. Like, you have to face some shit. Like, obviously
Mhm.
there's a problem somewhere and something, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so everyone is really forced to look at themselves, or they don't. But in my case, everyone did. There was enough group therapy, treatment center, family programs, times when everyone had to come together and like learn. So yeah, my mom tells me all the time, like, I'm so grateful for your addiction, your recovery now, because it's made me a better person, a better nurse. Like, I understand addiction so much more and all the things. So yeah, they
Yeah.
probably weren't saying that at the time, but
Right.
yeah.
What would you say to yourself if, like, back when you were in the midst of that, like the deepest depths of that addiction?
Um, man, I would say to myself, the belief you have that it is too hard to get sober is you're going to prove yourself wrong. And I know you don't believe that right now, but I'm just telling you it's possible, and you will. And it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done. And on the other side of that is going to be a life more beautiful than you could ever imagine. And that you're totally capable of that. You just have to take the smallest step. Because I think when you're that low at the bottom, it's like just getting a breath of sober air is like, that's never going to happen. So the thought of
Mhm.
like having to be a human again is like, there's no way. There's so much between me and that, right?
Mhm.
So we don't know how to just like break it down. Like, no, I'd have the tool, like just the next right step. What's the next small baby step we can do? My friend calls them Barbie steps, like little Barbie
I like
feet.
that. Yep.
Yeah, like it's not going to happen overnight, but you do have to start with the next step. And
Mhm.
when you're in there and you're loaded and you're so diluted by your disease, like it just there's no step. So it's just like then going back into the cycle of like oblivion over and over and over.
Right. And how were you able to take that first step into recovery and sobriety?
Yeah, so I was forced by some powers that be. I was in a hospital, and I had an abscess on my finger, which, if anyone doesn't know what that is, I stabbed myself with a dirty syringe, and
Mhm.
it created an infection and an abscess, and I still have a scar. So my finger was like swollen up to the size of a balloon, and I went to the hospital to get it because I was going to like lose my finger. And the doctor did blood work on me and found out that I was pregnant in early pregnancy.
Mm.
So that's what was the catalyst for me to get sober. I knew who the father was. It was my boyfriend at the time. He was out there with me. And it wasn't like we woke up sober the next day. It was like that was the plan. But unfortunately, it didn't happen for another 30 days. It was like the cycle of trying to get into detox, leaving detox. He's now leaving. Got to go get him because I'm codependent, carrying blah, 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 blah. Finally, he goes to jail. And I called my mom one day. I was really defeated, and like I just knew the clock was ticking, and every day I was putting my baby at risk. And so I called my mom, and she took me out to eat and was just like, let's go to Arts Treatment Center. It was this program in Kent. I can say
Oh,
Kent. You know
yep.
where Kent is.
Mhm.
Kent and Federal Way. Yeah, it was this program that my mom had been involved with for years, and they knew me super well. They're always, they kind of gave her counseling throughout my whole addiction. So she was like, let's just go to Arts. It's called Battlefield Addiction. Now it's called Refuge Recovery. And so I was just like, just defeated enough and just tired enough and just cold enough and just dope sick enough to be like, okay. And I was pregnant. So, and I know if I hadn't been pregnant, I wouldn't have given up, you know? So
Mhm.
she brought me there, and they fed me, they gave me a meal, and they were like, do you want to stay? And I think it was less scary than being like, I don't know. They, so I did. I stayed, and it was hell the first 6 months. It was so
Yeah.
hard. It was not like any other time. Every other time I gotten sober, it was kind of like, we're doing this. We can breathe again. Life is so beautiful. No, this time it was like, I'm going to have a baby. What the fuck am I going to do? You know?
Mhm.
Holy shit. Who do I think I am having a baby? Like, this is so awful. Like, I'm not going to be a good mom. Like, oh my goodness, you know?
Mhm.
But we did it. So that was
Yeah.
pretty wild. I still wake up and I'm like, did I really? I'm really a mom. Wow, that's so wild.
Mhm.
So that was it. My daughter was the catalyst. And I also want to add, please, 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 if you're listening and that wasn't enough of a catalyst for you, that's makes you no different than me. Like I was using drugs with my baby in utero and never thought I would do that. You know, if I
Mhm.
didn't have a history of addiction and I heard a woman say that, I would really judge her. It's just unfortunately part of this thing. It's like more powerful than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I always want to add that when I speak, because when we, as mothers in recovery that have had to get sober for our babies, we've had our children taken away or whatever, there's the element of shame just keeps people sick. It just keeps us out there shooting drugs.
Mhm.
Like we have to be strong enough to be like, you know what, I did that and now I'm going to be better, you know? So just want to say that. No shame to any mothers. You're amazing. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's exactly like why I do this podcast, because there are people out there, like anyone who does not have either a history of like family members who struggle with addiction. If they haven't personally struggled with addiction, they don't know, you
Yes.
know, they don't know what that's like. And so that's why I have this podcast, so that people can come on, whether it is about addiction or something else, to be
Yeah.
like, this is what it's really like. So like, let's bring less judgment to the
Yeah.
zone, you
Totally.
know?
I love
And
that.
so I am really grateful that you are sharing that.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so you said earlier that you have gone to a few different places for recovery.
Yeah.
Is there one that was best for you? Is there one that did something different that you really liked or anything like that?
Yeah, so I would say that it's really addiction's really confusing because there really isn't like one set answer or
Mm-hmm.
like formula that's going to work, because I have been to some of the shittiest places, but because I was desperate enough and like maybe I had the right roommate and just the right amount of something, that it worked. Or I've been to like really expensive places that were like acupuncture, you know, therapist, counselor, we're going to meetings, and like it wasn't enough because I wasn't
Mm-hmm.
willing. So it's kind of, I think parents and loved ones, we really want like, what's going to be the answer, right? So, but I would say out of all my experiences, every place I went to, I took something really powerful from, and I had a great experience, and they all were different,
Mm-hmm.
and they all had a different flavor, you know, and man, every place I went to was great, you know, truly. But it is, you do have to treat like all elements. Unfortunately, you can't just, like the mental health has to be addressed.
Mm-hmm.
And then the main issue that I always ran into is you get into a treatment center and you finally get your life together. And because you have no self discipline, you really need someone to be like, now you're going to make your bed. Now you're going to go to a meal. Now you're going to go to group. Now you're going to go to this. And then, do you know what I mean? And so you get into this routine and you're like in this safe bubble. And it's really great. And you have all this support. And if you want to get
Mm-hmm.
high, you just turn to your neighbor and you're like, hey, I'm having a craving. And it's like a constant, you're safe. And then you go back into the real world after like 30 or 60 days and you're just walking into your empty home, you know, or you're into sober living, and that's definitely more helpful. But I think it's a flaw in our structure, our system, probably just because our society is like, we're all pretty independent, isolated, you know?
Yeah.
So that really lacks. And that's why when I go into treatment centers to speak, I'm like, you have to make yourself known in recovery. You have to go to a meeting and say, I'm new, I need support right now, because you're going to get lost and you're not going to call someone. So it's hard. It's like really hard to go from rehab back to life, because you're just like, now I have my phone. I have my dealer's number right here. And now it's up to me to call my
Mm-hmm.
sponsor instead of the dealer. So, yeah, that's an issue that I struggled with, but yeah.
Yeah. What were some of the biggest helps from people around you to help you stay like on the road of recovery?
Yeah, this time it was, like I said, it was different just because I had the element of my child, my unborn
Mhm.
daughter. But prior to that, just like-minded, strong women. I always
Mhm.
found the women that had what I wanted and were doing this thing and had been to the depths I had been at, but were now like women of dignity and grace and success, and were just like had that thing that I wanted. So that is how I have always been able to stay sober, is getting in the middle of a good, solid group and
Mhm.
finding women in recovery. And like the coolest people are in recovery, like the most from all kinds, from like just, in my current sponsor lineage, there's like multiple therapists, and like it just, you wouldn't even believe, like the coolest people are recovering, from drugs
Mhm.
and alcohol. So, and then family wise, I don't know, I guess just supporting me. The best thing my partner did was get his own recovery and start working his own program. Otherwise, we wouldn't have made it for sure. So that was the best thing he could have done. And anytime family members reach out to me, like on TikTok, like my boyfriend's he's going to rehab. Like, what do I do? And I'm like, the best thing you can do is go to Al-Anon, or like go take care of you, right? Like,
Mhm.
can't save him. Nobody could save me, unfortunately. But yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um, um, have you, since in the last 7 years, because I know you mentioned you first got sober at 19, and then you said at 26, it now has been like that's where the 7 years are.
Yes.
Um, within these 7 years, do you still struggle with like that desire to do any of it, or has that mostly gone away now?
Yeah. So with like the 12 steps and the work I've done in recovery, and just like how much your life and your brain changes, I don't, I have like that buffer where I know like substances won't solve anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then I never want to lose like the beautiful life I've built. But I think it will always be ingrained in me in a moment of like sheer panic and hopelessness or something hard, where I'm just like, well, I could go get high. You
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? It's like that could be my first thought. Like, I can always get high. And then it's followed with like, God, not even that's an option anymore. I truly have to like use life and face this shit. And I have to
Mm-hmm.
like feel these feelings and work through them. Like that's actually gonna make me feel better. And it's a longer option, but it's a better option. Like, oh, sometimes that's like annoying, you know? I
Yeah.
don't get to just take this easy, which is not easy. It's like the fucking worst, hardest, most difficult way you could choose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that definitely still comes up. But the beautiful thing is like I have a partner in recovery, and like I can say that out loud, and it's like nothing, it's no big thing. Or I can say that at a meeting and people understand, and they know I'm not going to act on it. Maybe if I said that to my mom, she'd be horrified, but you can say that to other understanding people. So yeah, and
Yeah.
sometimes, hasn't happened in a while, but I have family members that drink, on Ryan's side. Ryan's my boyfriend. And so sometimes, like, if we spend a weekend with them and like just seeing them take a shot, and I just remembering in that brief second what that feels like, that part of my brain is so strong. It's
Mm-hmm.
interesting. It's like I can have a visceral reaction, right? Like if I think about the drugs I used to do, like I can start to increase my heart rate. It's just really interesting how powerful the brain is. So that stuff will probably always be there, I would
Mm-hmm.
assume. But like I don't have any desire to use that anymore, because it's just like not a solution today. It's truly like
Mm-hmm.
not on the table. It's so weird because it was always on the table and now it's
Right.
just, so there's so many other things that make me feel good. Like the good high I get from running, the good high I get from breath work. Like, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think finding those other things and realizing that, like, I love that you now realize it's not what's going to actually help you. And it takes a lot to admit that and realize that. And
Yeah.
so that's awesome.
Well, and the other thing is I think I always knew that prior, but
Hmm.
the problem is sometimes I could know that and then be like, but I don't care. Like,
Right.
it's not the solution, but I'm going to go ahead and just do it anyway.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure why that has switched now. I think maybe just, with the amount of work I've done, just like I can't be that selfish anymore. I truly can't. It's like I don't. I don't ever want to be that selfish again, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And then you said you do a lot of work with other people recovering and helping other people through recovery. So, sorry. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So in the 12 step world, we do what's called sponsorship. So it's where like, you know, the 12 steps are just kind of like one way to get to the internal. And, you know, they're derived from the Bible, but they're not like religiously based,
Mhm.
but they have a lot of religious undertones. And so it's, you know, it's literally, I always say it's not the way, it's just one way. It's kind of like, you know, Buddhism, like a confessional, all mixed into one. And then you really get to look at yourself and like change the parts of yourself and just like kind of have like a really quickly accelerated evolution. And when we come in as addicts and alcoholics, we, like I said, like we're so fucking selfish. And so the 12 steps are kind of just like a boot to, you know, your life. Like this is how you're going to think of other people. And this is how you're going to stop showing up like a total shithead.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of self-love in there too, and a lot of forgiveness and a lot of shame. And you can choose how deep you go with it, you know? There's and then also once I feel like the bulk of it's done, you spread out into like other avenues. Like most of the people I know are like, you know, they've gone into like what I said, breath work or like Reiki or just some kind of healing or yoga, or like they become healers of some sort. So like it's all kind of like the people joke and say it's like spirituality for dummies. It's just like how to be slightly enlightened 101, you know? And it's like we have to like have a book to tell us how to do that, which is hilarious because some people are just really good people that just think of others. And for some reason, the addict and the alcoholic, like we're just not like that. We just think about like us, me, I want to feel good all the time, blah, blah, blah. So anyways, the 12 steps are this fucking rad process, and God really, it takes on its own form, you know, every time it works. It's incredible. And so once you're done with that process, your job is to then go help someone else through the process. So that's what I mean when I say sponsee and sponsor.
Mhm.
I do that. And then I speak on a panel once a month. And then I'm really a part of the 12 step program where I do like outreach for in our area, lots of all the detoxes and treatment centers. We just, yeah, we try and just get our name out there. Like, hey, this is a program you can come to afterwards to get more support. And yeah, we're planning a world convention right now for the 12 step program I'm a part of. So that's cool. And my daughter just has grown up around this stuff, which some people might be like, oh, but I mean, people in recovery are the best people I know. So
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful thing. We shield her as much as we can, but she's got lots of aunties and uncles that really love her. And yeah, it's pretty beautiful. So that's the service that I do. Yeah.
I love that. That's really amazing. And the fact that it kind of does that process of you
Yeah.
have a sponsor and then getting to be a sponsor, I think is
Yeah.
amazing. And I
Yeah.
love that you bring your daughter to do things because, like, yes, there is that level of shielding from certain things,
Yeah.
but also it is the real world. And there are people, and especially since it is a part of your story and your boyfriend's story, like, that's huge. So
Yeah.
I love that you're doing that with her.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's really a different time. Like I know our both my partner and I's parents would have never been honest about their past, right? Like it was kind of like this idea of perfection. And
Hmm.
I really think our generation has changed that. Where like I really want her to know. Not I'm not going to traumatize her and tell her things that are not age appropriate, but
Right.
I'm going to be honest because for one, she needs to know that she's genetically predisposed. Like if
Right.
I didn't even know what alcoholism was,
Hmm.
right? And like my dad and I, like I know the statistics might have changed in the last like 5 years, but I know if a male has a daughter and he has the gene of alcoholism, there's a 50% chance he's going to pass it to her. And if it's
Wow.
a son, it's different. And I don't know the science behind that, but I learned that in school and it was just like, wow, no one told me like, hey, you may react differently to substances if you use them. You know, maybe you won't, you might.
Hmm.
And but of course, my parents would have had to be, my dad would have had to be in recovery and humble enough to even admit he had a problem, which
Right.
he won't ever do. So, but yeah, so I think being honest with her is great. And also, it's a lot like going to church. You know, we're not sitting there talking about drugs and alcohol. We're sitting there talking about life, talking about the
Right.
spiritual principles, what we're dealing with in the day to day. How can we walk through this situation? How do we cope? Where can we be honest? It's a lot like being a part of a church where you're just trying to be a good person. That's literally
Yeah.
all it is. There's so many similarities with church. So it's cool. It's just like a community of people who are genuinely trying to be good people. you know?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that.
Just
And
have a little bit more like dark humor and you can say, like, I used to shoot dope and like the church lady doesn't go like, you know?
yeah,
So
I
yeah.
love that. And yeah, and I think people who like are in church, we should be the people out there, like reaching out to people. The
Yeah.
church used to do that's one of my big things. The church needs to do a much better job of
Really.
being out and just helping people. Not you don't have to go and literally just be like, you turn to Jesus or
Right.
anything like that, but literally
Right.
just going out to help people and build, even like just building relationships as and slowly helping them, I think is something the church can really improve on. And because we're in our own little bubble, I think sometimes in the church of like, oh, well, that's out there. That's not something that
Mm.
we deal with or whatever. But
Totally.
there's a lot of people out there dealing with that. And those are the people who need the hope and the life that I think the church can truly give.
No,
Well, not the church, Jesus through the church can give.
right. No, I
So,
love that too because the program talk our biggest thing is like attraction, not promotion. So
mhm,
really like I shouldn't ever be like a walking billboard for 12 step. Instead, like I should just act with a way that's attractive to someone. And then if they find out I'm in recovery, like they can associate it with that. In the
yes.
same way, like I remember learning about, like this one organization of Christian women that go and they spend time with the hookers out on the corner and like
Hmm.
without judgment. They're not
Yeah.
converting anybody. They're going out there with like food and blankets and they're a safety net and they have resources if they're asked. And like, what a beautiful example of Christ.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's how we help people is we're like, we're going to humanize you and talk to you like you're an equal. So you don't,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
love that.
Absolutely. I actually had a lady on and that's something similar to what she does. She helps women out of prostitution, but she does it through that building of relationships, allowing them, like, yes, she obviously you have to somewhat go out there, but allowing them to come to her to ask. She's not being like, you need to get out or anything like that.
Right.
It's just like, I'm going to build that relationship with you. And then when you're like, oh, well, what does your organization do? How can they help me? Then explaining that kind of thing. If that makes
Yeah. I
sense.
love that. Can you say what the organization is?
Yeah. It's Stay With Me for is it 407? Here, let me look it up. Her
I love,
name's Robin. She's great. Stay. Yeah, Stay With Me 407.
no, that's so cool.
So,
Because I
yeah.
know there's a couple organizations in Seattle that work with women trying to come out of prostitution. And
Mhm.
yeah, I always like eventually I would love to just do something, whether it's working with women, pregnant women that are trying to get sober, or just adding to the housing that's needed for women,
Mhm.
children, or work with women trying to get out of prostitution. All the things.
Right.
Rest, REST. Have you heard of
Oh, yes.
that?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yep.
that place seems very cool too. So
Yeah, that's awesome. Stay With Me 407. She's in Florida and Amsterdam. So she's originally from Amsterdam. Her
wow,
husband's from Florida. And so in Amsterdam, prostitution's completely legal. And
right.
so she goes to the red light district there
Uh,
and talks to women. And then she does the same thing in Florida.
wow, that's cool.
Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I
Yeah.
love
And especially because I think a lot of these things go hand in hand a lot of times, like
totally.
addiction with homelessness, addiction with prostitution, addiction with lots of things. And then obviously there are people who it's not even um, the same reasons or whatever.
Right.
But I think it's important, like you were saying earlier, to address all of like for you, it was the mental health and the actual addiction, so just getting to root causes, I think, is
Yeah.
really important.
No, I think you're so right. And that's what a lot of people miss. And I forget that people even think this way because to me, it's like so clear. Like if anyone is living that, like if anyone's homeless, like no one really is going to choose to like be dirty and cold and be in
Right.
that level of survival mode unless like something's going on.
Hmm.
And some people do, of course, just because like fuck society. But even then it's like, how do we give this person the tools to function in a level that's like humane?
Yeah.
And for me, I didn't know I knew one sex worker that was a sex worker without an addiction. You know, she was doing it by choice, and whether it was to support herself financially or she found empowerment, I don't know. I can't assume what her story was, but every other woman out there that I knew was trying to feed a habit. And ultimately, when we're trying to feed an addiction, like, we're just trying, I mean, it's all comes down to like, how, I want to be safe. And to me, being safe and okay is being high, whether that's because I'm physically dependent, emotionally, mentally, but all three typically. But yes, it's always like, because if I can just get clean, then I don't have to do this to support my habit, you know? And it's really unfortunate
Yeah.
because men are really, you know, we're in the most vulnerable situation there is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I appreciate that that perspective. It takes away the shame and the judgment from it. I have so much empathy for women, and I have so much respect because it's truly, it takes a level of strength and courage to do that,
Mm-hmm.
that I know not everybody has, and that I did have. I was able to find that in myself, and it helped me survive. You know, that version of me helped me fucking survive. And I'm just glad that I'm not that version anymore, but
Mm-hmm.
I still love her and respect her, and you know, so
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to quickly talk to you too about kind of your belief in God and everything, because I know you had mentioned that that's big to you, but it does look a little different. Because another thing I was thinking about when you were talking about your daughter and having her with you to do things is, I think a lot of times we don't realize, like, we preach in Sunday school or whatever these stories to kids, but we don't ever talk about the things that are actually happening in the Bible. Like, the Bible has a lot of crazy stuff that happens.
yeah,
Um, and so I think sometimes we do a disservice to children in some senses. Like, yes, there are times you need to like not talk about certain things because it's not age appropriate, but sometimes, yeah, we just do a disservice to children because we don't, not dumb it down, but we shelter it so much that
yeah,
it's like, okay, that's not even the story though. Like, you're
yeah,
missing a lot of the points.
yeah.
And so that was another thing of why I think it's awesome that you're bringing your daughter. And again, obviously age appropriate, but you're not shielding her from every single thing that could,
Yeah.
that makes sense.
No, no, totally. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think we're forever navigating that balance of like, I can't I can't eliminate all her pain and suffering. She's learning hard lessons all on her own, walking through just being her little, she's almost 6, so her little 6-year-old world, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and like how I can't lock her in a safe house for the rest of her life and shelter her from pain. It's like horrifying. So then how do I walk through it with her so she's fully secure in herself and her she has full attachment, secure attachment to me and her dad,
Mm-hmm.
know that like no matter what happens, like she's safe and protected here and in physical form. You know, how do we make her emotionally safe? And yeah, and we talk about God all the time, you know, and she's got a lot of questions and I don't always know how to answer them. My faith journey is always evolving. So yeah, yeah.
That's
Sorry, did you
awesome.
ask me a question and I just didn't even answer it? Okay.
No, no, no. I hadn't yet.
Okay.
But what does your faith look like now?
Yeah, so recently it's like shifted, you know, it's interesting. I go through dry spells. I always have so in recovery we really do have to rely on something bigger than us. And it can literally be like the power of the group or it can just be like the universe and it can be ambiguous. It, you know, it doesn't have to be defined. And so I always have that. And I'm always like, you know, taking time at least once a day to tap into this present moment, my inner wisdom, love, whatever you want to call it. But sometimes I hit a surrender point, and I did recently. There's a lot going on in our personal lives right now. And so I hit a surrender point, and this woman, Betsy, in AA, I heard her say, like, you know, 10 years ago when I was new, she spoke once and she said, she was like an old timer, old biker. And she said, listen, you just have to find a God you can do business with. And if that God stops working for you, you can try another one. And that was really important for me because I would get so caught up in like, what's the right thing to believe. And the truth is I had to really explore that and figure it out. Nobody could really tell me, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, and it's ebbed and flowed. But anyways, I had to surrender about a month ago, where I got on my knees and I prayed to I prayed to God in a way I hadn't in a really long time. It was like guttural and raw. And the next morning I read scripture, and it really, I don't know, I'm just riding the wave of that. I wouldn't call myself a Christian, but of course, there's so many things that I believe and relate to from the Bible and from the Christian faith. And I also just needed a little bit more clear cut direction from God. And so this was like the most accessible thing. And it's like really filling me up in a new way. We're going through some really hard shit right now. Everything's okay, but it's just really hard. We're walking through some
Yeah.
really hard seasons. And I needed God to be with me on like a way bigger level. So we're talking like every hour I'm tapping into the love of like Jesus, God, spirit, whatever you want to call it. And as I'm praying, I'm saying those things. And like, I know God doesn't care. Right. And I'm just on this like journey with whatever it is and whatever I'm being called to. So, and Ryan's great. I'm like, I think I might try and go to church. And he's like, cool. Like, can I come? I'm like, yeah, and I know we've been listening. Estella loves like Spirit 105.3. We
Oh,
listen to
yep.
that a lot.
Mm-hmm.
She's really receptive to like that or meditation music because she's a spiritual little being all on her own.
Mm-hmm.
So I really just I needed a more biblical God. I don't know. It could be a season, and I hate, yeah, but I needed something. I just needed more. And so that was what's called to me. And it's interesting that like it require hard times and pain is what causes that surrender to seek
Mm-hmm.
more. So it's like a blessing, really, because I feel more connected to God than I have in probably the last year. So
Yeah.
it's been really cool.
That's
And that's
awesome.
a very recent thing. So it was interesting that then you asked me to be on like a faith-based kind of podcast,
Mm-hmm.
or you're open about your faith. So I thought that was like, oh, no coincidences.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing is, what is the number one thing, like either piece of advice or just thing you would like to say to people who are still struggling with addiction?
Oh man, this question, I'm always like praying in my head, like, God, please help me to say whatever someone needs to hear. Um, the reasons people are still struggling are so complex, and there really isn't like one thing someone can say. The best tool I have been able to use is literally just telling my story exactly the way it is,
Mm-hmm.
and someone hearing it and seeing me today and like that giving them. And I think my testimony is like so much more hopeful than just anything I can say.
Right.
So I just, whatever you're feeling, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, however much shame or guilt or fear you're in, I have felt that exact same way. In fact, probably thousands of people have, and you're not the only one, and you're not alone. And there
Mm-hmm.
is a solution, you know? Yeah, man, there's hope. And I really think that the powers that be can turn anyone's story into a testimony. And then you have that as your superpower to help the next person and pull them out of the darkness. So, and that's like the best part. But
Yeah.
probably the best advice I would say is call your mom. Call your mom. If
Yeah.
you don't have a mom, call the next person that's closest to you. They probably need to hear from you. They probably want to know if you're okay.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. What is the number one thing you want people who don't really understand it to know about addiction and recovery?
Yeah, so addiction is just a symptom, right? Like any disease, a disease, like the definition of a disease is a dysfunction of an organ. And an addiction, the case for this dysfunction is it's our brain. So the symptoms look really different than like insulin, or a cancer. The symptoms are like stealing, jail, overdoses, homelessness, just not taking care of ourselves, putting substances before everything. So
Mm-hmm.
those are like really like hard, unlovable symptoms, right? That we really want to blame as like a character flaw or like a matter of moral failing. And it's just not that simple. it's not that simple. And the human condition is never that simple, right? So, what I would want to tell people is just empathy and compassion are like first and foremost, but also I think, yeah, I don't know. It's a fine line. I think Seattle, it doesn't always does people a disservice a lot of times. Like I am pro harm reduction and pro mat, and I do believe that like sometimes we need consequences and we need reinforced laws and things like that because I see good from both.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that comes first though. If somebody's looking at addiction, like God, these people are just running through. You know, I hear it all the time. My
Yeah.
boyfriend hears it on the job site. He's an electrician, and you know a lot of people don't know
Mhm.
his story, so they'll just talk to him and like they think to them like a homeless drug addict is like expendable, like they're worthless. And to me, like I would never even give that person that has that view the time of day. People
Yeah.
would say that about me being an ex-prostitute, and like to me, I just know that like their opinion, like I feel sorry for them. They probably need a hug from me.
Mhm.
That has nothing to do with me and my worth. But a lot of people view it that way. It's really crazy. So I don't know what can be said to them. I think people like that have to be shaken into a place where they have empathy, either by experiencing addiction for themselves or seeing a loved one go through it. And
Mhm.
really, the people that have empathy usually have that experience, you know?
Yeah. But I'm so sorry that people say that stuff.
Oh
It's
my gosh, it's okay. It's been, it's just been a part of the deal. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Well, hopefully everyone who listens to this will have a little change of mind if that's the
Right.
section they're in of
Right. And we
opinions.
all have a little bit of stigma
Yeah.
and judgment. And like even I do now, like if someone I love relapses, I'm like, what the fuck? Why couldn't you just
Right.
try harder? And like it's just when you're not in that level of suffering, it's really hard to have full compassion, right? I think that's just
Yeah.
kind of normal. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, my last question I ask everybody is how can we be praying for you?
Oh, right now my family is a lot's up in the air. So I guess I just pray that we get closer to alignment with God and
Mhm.
we're able to get through this rough season. And I know we will, and we come out on the other side. But yeah, that just we don't lose sight of God in this, and that we're able to walk through this with, yeah, I'm sure God's working on our hearts somehow, working through some, we'll come
Yep.
out better. So yeah, prayers for that
Absolutely.
strength.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I will definitely be praying for you. I always do, and I know my listeners do too. So,
Thank you.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited to share this episode and just to share your story because, like you were saying, the story is like one of the most important things. It catches the attention, and then they see how you're living. And truly, I know as like, even as a Christian, that's the biggest thing is sharing your testimony and just allowing who you are as a person and the way that you walk and then your story to just speak for itself. So I
Exactly.
think that's really great.
Thank you guys so much for listening to this week's episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it because I definitely did. Julia is such a sweetheart, and I'm so excited to see where the Lord takes her story and what He can do with it because, like I said at the beginning, I think a lot of good can come out of it. So I'm so excited. Make sure to check her stuff out because she posts a lot of really awesome content. I put it all in the show notes. Also, all the Talk Busy with Lizzy stuff is in the show notes, so check all of it out. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week. I'll see you guys for next week's episode, and God bless.